The smell of freshly baked bread and sweet pastries wafted through the air, mingling with the crisp scent of early autumn leaves. Elm Street, usually quiet and unremarkable, buzzed with an unusual energy. After years of abandonment, the quaint little bakery nestled between an antique shop and a dilapidated bookstore was finally reopening under new management. A freshly painted sign, Carter's Confections, swung gently in the breeze, its golden letters glinting in the sunlight. As the townspeople gathered outside, their faces lit up with anticipation. For many, the reopening of the bakery was a welcome change, a sign of renewal and hope. Yet beneath the excitement, an eerie sense of déjà vu lingered, especially among the older residents who remembered the bakery's dark past. Emily, the head baker, stood behind the counter, nervously adjusting her apron. She had worked tirelessly for weeks, perfecting recipes and ensuring everything was ready for the grand reopening. Beside her, Mr. Carter, the new owner, greeted customers with a warm smile, his eyes twinkling with pride and enthusiasm. "Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to have you here today," Mr. Carter announced, his voice carrying over the excited chatter. "Please come in and enjoy our special opening day treats." The crowd surged forward, eager to taste the pastries that had once made the bakery famous. The bell above the door jingled merrily as the first patron stepped inside, their eyes widening at the sight of the beautifully arranged display cases filled with an array of delectable goodies. As the morning wore on, the bakery bustled with activity. Old friends reunited over cups of steaming coffee, and children giggled with delight as they bit into flaky croissants and rich chocolate eclairs. Emily moved swiftly behind the counter, her hands a blur of motion as she served customers and kept the trays stocked with fresh pastries. Yet, amidst the cheerful atmosphere, a few patrons couldn't shake an unsettling feeling. Elderly Mrs. Weatherby, a longtime resident of Elm Street, hesitated at the threshold, her brow furrowed in thought. She had been a young woman when the bakery first opened many decades ago, and the memories of that time were etched deeply into her mind. Stepping inside, Mrs. Weatherby felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced around, her gaze lingering on the polished wooden floors and the gleaming glass display cases. Everything looked perfect, yet something was off. The air seemed heavier, almost oppressive, and a faint, metallic scent tickled her nose. As she approached the counter, a sudden vision flashed before her eyes. The bustling bakery was gone, replaced by a dark and foreboding scene. Blood stained the floors, and anguished cries echoed through the empty space. She could see shadowy figures moving frantically in the kitchen, their faces twisted in terror. With a gasp, Mrs. Weatherby stumbled back, clutching her chest. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her breathless and trembling. Emily noticed her distress and rushed over, concern etched on her face. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Emily asked, gently guiding Mrs. Weatherby to a chair. Mrs. Weatherby nodded weakly, her eyes wide with fear. It's nothing. Just a dizzy spell," she murmured, though she couldn't shake the lingering sense of dread. Emily offered a comforting smile and brought her a glass of water. "Take your time. If you need anything, just let us know." As the day wore on, similar incidents began to occur. Patrons reported strange sensations, fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Despite the delicious pastries and the welcoming atmosphere, a growing unease settled over the bakery. By evening, the initial excitement had given way to nervous glances and hushed conversations. The bakery's grand reopening, meant to be a joyous occasion, was overshadowed by an intangible darkness. The townspeople couldn't help but wonder if the bakery's troubled past had truly been laid to rest, or if the ghosts of its history still lingered, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The following day dawned bright and clear, yet the bakery felt shrouded in a peculiar gloom. Emily arrived early, eager to start the day's preparations. She hoped the unsettling incidents of the grand reopening were mere coincidences, the product of overactive imaginations in an old, storied town. As the morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm golden hues over the polished surfaces, patrons began to trickle in. Among them was Mrs. Weatherby, determined to face her fears. She entered with a firm resolve, but the moment she crossed the threshold, a chill prickled her skin. The aroma of fresh pastries filled the air, a comforting scent that drew people in. Mrs. Weatherby ordered a cup of tea and a scone, settling at a small table by the window. She sipped her tea, trying to shake off the unease, but as she bit into her scone, a sudden, vivid vision seized her. The bakery was transformed. The cheerful chatter faded, replaced by the sharp clang of metal and the dull thud of heavy objects hitting the floor. Mrs. Weatherby could see the kitchen through a haze of blood and smoke. A figure stood in the center, hunched and grotesque, its hands stained crimson. The anguished cries of unseen victims echoed around her, filling her ears with a cacophony of horror. Mrs. Weatherby gasped, the scone falling from her trembling fingers. The vision dissipated, leaving her breathless and pale. She glanced around, but no one seemed to notice her distress. Summoning her strength, she stood and made her way to the counter. Emily looked up, her smile faltering at the sight of Mrs. Weatherby's ashen face. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Weatherby?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Mrs. Weatherby shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw something terrible. The kitchen. It was covered in blood." Emily's eyes widened, but she quickly composed herself. Maybe it was just a memory, something from the past playing tricks on your mind. This place has a long history, after all. Mrs. Weatherby nodded, but the fear in her eyes remained. Perhaps, but it felt so real. As the day progressed, more patrons arrived, each lured by the promise of delicious treats. The bakery was bustling once more, but the air of unease persisted. Whispers spread among the customers, tales of strange visions and eerie sensations that couldn't be easily dismissed. Among the patrons were a young couple, Sarah and Mark, eager to try the bakery's famed eclairs. They chatted happily as they chose their pastries, unaware of the spectral figure watching them from the shadows of the kitchen. Seated by the fireplace, Sarah took a bite of her eclair, closing her eyes in delight. But when she opened them, she saw the figure, a baker with hollow eyes and a twisted grin, his form flickering like a distorted image on an old television screen. He reached out with blood-stained hands, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Sarah dropped her eclair, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at Mark, but he seemed oblivious, happily munching on his treat. "Did you see that?" she whispered urgently, her eyes wide with fear. Mark looked up, puzzled. "See what?" There was a man, a ghost, I think, in the kitchen. Mark frowned, glancing toward the kitchen. "I don't see anything. Maybe it was a reflection or something." Sarah shook her head, her skin crawling with dread. No, it was real. I know it. As the day turned to evening, the bakery's lively atmosphere was marred by the growing sense of dread. Emily couldn't ignore the mounting reports of strange occurrences. She tried to reassure the patrons, but doubt gnawed at her own mind. The bakery, once a symbol of hope and renewal, seemed to be transforming into a place of nightmares. And as the shadows lengthened and the whispers grew louder, Emily knew she had to uncover the truth behind the bakery's dark past before it consumed them all. The following week, the bakery's popularity showed no signs of waning, despite the unnerving experiences of its patrons. Emily threw herself into her work, hoping that the busyness would distract her from the growing unease. She arrived early each morning, her routine providing a small measure of comfort. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across Elm Street, a young couple entered the bakery. Alex and Jessica were new to town and had heard rave reviews about Carter's confections. Their excitement was palpable as they browsed the display cases, choosing a selection of pastries to take home. "These look amazing," Jessica exclaimed, her eyes wide with delight. "I've heard so much about this place." Alex nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's try one now. I can't wait." They settled at a small table near the window, unwrapping their treats with anticipation. As they laughed and enjoyed their pastries, a sudden chill swept through the room. Jessica shivered, rubbing her arms. "Did you feel that?" she asked, glancing around. Alex frowned. "Yeah, weird. Maybe it's just a draft." Jessica's eyes wandered to the kitchen. She squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. A figure stood there, partially obscured by shadows. The baker, dressed in an old-fashioned uniform, was watching them. His eyes were dark, hollow pits, and his face twisted into a grotesque grin. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you see that?" Alex turned, following her gaze. For a moment, he saw nothing unusual. Then, the figure stepped forward, becoming clearer. The baker's hands were stained with blood, and he moved with an unnatural, jerky motion. Alex's breath caught in his throat as the apparition locked eyes with him. "Let's go," Alex said urgently, grabbing Jessica's hand. They hurried out of the bakery, their pastries forgotten on the table. Outside, the cool evening air did little to calm their racing hearts. Jessica glanced back at the bakery, its windows glowing warmly in the fading light. "What was that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Alex replied, trying to steady his breathing. But it felt real. Too real. Inside the bakery, Emily noticed the couple's sudden departure and frowned. She had seen it happen too many times recently. She approached the table they had left and found their untouched pastries. As she cleared the table, a movement in the kitchen caught her eye. Emily's heart skipped a beat. There, standing just beyond the counter, was the spectral figure of the baker. His hollow eyes seemed to bore into her soul, and his twisted grin sent a chill down her spine. She blinked, and the figure vanished, leaving her shaken. Emily retreated to the back room, her hands trembling. She couldn't deny it any longer. Something was terribly wrong. The bakery, her pride and joy, was haunted by the past in ways she couldn't understand. As she leaned against the wall, trying to compose herself, the whispers started again. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, they grew louder, echoing through the empty kitchen. Voices, pleading for help, for release. Emily covered her ears, but the whispers seemed to seep into her mind, relentless and insistent. Desperate for answers, Emily decided to speak to Mr. Carter. She found him in his office, reviewing receipts and inventory. He looked up as she entered, concern etching his features. "Emily, what's wrong?" he asked, noting her pale complexion. "It's the bakery," she said, her voice wavering. "There's something here. Ghosts, apparitions. I don't know how to explain it, but it's real. The patrons have seen things. I've seen things." Mr. Carter sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I've heard the rumors, but I hoped they were just that. Rumors. The bakery has a dark history, but I never imagined it would affect us like this." Emily nodded. "We need to find out what happened here. We need to understand why these spirits are haunting us." Mr. Carter rubbed his temples, deep in thought. "I agree. We can't let this continue. It could ruin us." Together, they decided to delve into the bakery's past, determined to uncover the truth. Little did they know, the horrors they would unearth would be far more chilling than they could ever have imagined. The spirits of the bakery were restless, their tragic stories woven into the very fabric of the building. And as Emily and Mr. Carter would soon discover, the past was not ready to be forgotten. The bakery was unusually quiet the next morning. Emily arrived even earlier than usual, determined to keep her mind occupied. She moved through the familiar routines of preparing the dough, mixing ingredients, and setting the ovens, but a sense of dread clung to her like a shroud. As she kneaded the dough, the first whispers began. Soft and indistinct at first, they grew louder, forming words that sent chills down her spine. "Help us. Release us." Emily froze, her hands buried in the soft, pliant dough. She glanced around the empty kitchen, but there was no one else there. The voices seemed to come from the very walls themselves, echoing through the space like ghostly pleas. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The whispers intensified, filling the room with their haunting chorus. Emily clutched the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. Her heart pounded in her chest as the voices continued, each one more desperate than the last. "Save us. He's coming." Emily's mind raced. She had heard stories of haunted places, but she had never imagined experiencing it firsthand. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She couldn't let fear consume her. Determined to get through the day, Emily pushed the whispers to the back of her mind and focused on her work. She rolled out the dough, shaped it into loaves and pastries, and placed them in the ovens. The rhythmic motions brought a semblance of normalcy, but the whispers never completely faded. Later that morning, Mr. Carter arrived, his face drawn and weary. He had spent the night poring over old records, trying to piece together the bakery's history. He approached Emily as she set out trays of fresh pastries. "Emily, I found something," he said quietly. The previous owner, the one who was accused of those horrible crimes. His name was Samuel Grayson. He was known for his secret recipes, but there were rumors that he used unconventional ingredients. Emily swallowed hard, her stomach turning at the thought. "You mean human remains?" Mr. Carter nodded grimly. The townspeople believed he was using the bodies of his victims in his pastries. They formed a mob and, well, they took matters into their own hands. Samuel was killed right here in the kitchen. Emily shuddered, the cold fingers of fear gripping her heart. That explains the visions, the blood, the screams. They're reliving that night. Mr. Carter placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. We need to find a way to help these spirits find peace. Maybe if we uncover the full truth, we can put them to rest. Determined to uncover more, Emily and Mr. Carter began interviewing older townsfolk, hoping to learn more about Samuel Grayson and the events that had transpired. They discovered that Samuel had been a recluse, often seen late at night, working in his kitchen. There were whispers of his obsession with perfection, of his descent into madness. As they dug deeper, they learned of a diary Samuel had kept, said to contain his darkest secrets. The diary had been lost in the chaos of his death, but rumors suggested it was hidden somewhere within the bakery. One evening, after the bakery had closed, Emily stayed behind to search for the diary. She combed through the kitchen, checking every nook and cranny. The whispers grew louder, guiding her to a loose floorboard near the old oven. With trembling hands, Emily pried up the floorboard, revealing a small, dust-covered book. She opened it, her eyes scanning the yellowed pages filled with Samuel's scrawling handwriting. The entries detailed his descent into madness, his experiments with dark rituals, and his belief that he could create the perfect pastry by sacrificing human lives. As Emily read the final chilling entry, the temperature in the room plummeted. The whispers became a cacophony, swirling around her. She could feel the presence of the spirits, their anguish and pain palpable. "Emily!" Mr. Carter's voice cut through the din. He had returned, sensing something was wrong. Emily looked up, her face pale. "I found it. The diary. He really did those things, Mr. Carter. He believed it would make his pastries perfect." Mr. Carter's expression hardened. "We have to do something. These spirits deserve peace." Together, they decided to consult a local historian and a spiritual medium, hoping to find a way to cleanse the bakery of its dark past. As the night deepened and the bakery grew still, Emily and Mr. Carter knew they were on the brink of something monumental. The spirits' whispers, once a source of terror, now seemed to guide them toward the truth, and perhaps toward redemption. The next morning, Emily and Mr. Carter visited Curtis Reynolds, the town's local historian. Curtis had lived in Elm Street for most of his life and was a repository of its dark and twisted past. His small, cluttered home was filled with old books, yellowed newspapers, and artifacts that whispered of the town's history. Curtis greeted them warmly, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "I've heard rumors about the bakery," he said, ushering them into his study. "What brings you here?" Emily handed him the diary, her hands still trembling from the discovery. "We found this hidden in the bakery. It's Samuel Grayson's diary. It confirms the worst of the rumors." Curtis's face grew serious as he carefully opened the book and began to read. His brow furrowed as he scanned the pages, his expression darkening with each entry. After several minutes, he closed the diary and looked up at them, his eyes filled with a mix of horror and resolve. "It's worse than I thought," Curtis said quietly. "Samuel wasn't just a madman. He was delving into dark rituals, trying to use human lives to perfect his recipes. This diary is a record of his descent into depravity." Emily shivered, the room seeming to grow colder with Curtis's words. "We need to put an end to this. The spirits in the bakery are restless. They need peace." Curtis nodded. "I've read about such hauntings before. The spirits are trapped, reliving their final moments, because they can't find peace. We need to uncover the full truth and perform a ritual to cleanse the bakery. Curtis agreed to help them further, diving into his extensive collection of local records. He found old newspaper articles detailing the gruesome events that had transpired, the trial of Samuel Grayson, and the mob that had taken justice into their own hands. The articles described the horrors discovered in the bakery's kitchen, evidence of Samuel's dark practices, and the remains of his victims. As they pieced together the horrific puzzle, Curtis found a crucial piece of information. "There's an old legend," he said, pulling out a dusty tome. "It speaks of a ritual that can release trapped spirits. We need to gather specific items, each representing an element tied to the spirit's suffering and their connection to this world." Emily and Mr. Carter listened intently as Curtis listed the items. A piece of the original bakery, a symbol of innocence lost, an item of personal significance to Samuel, and an instrument of his crimes. They would also need a spiritual medium to guide the spirits to rest. Determined to break the curse, Emily and Mr. Carter set out to gather the items. They found a loose brick from the bakery's foundation, a doll that had belonged to one of the child victims, and Samuel's personal locket, discovered hidden in a crack in the wall. The final item, the knife Samuel had used in his rituals, was found buried under the floorboards in the kitchen. With the items gathered, they turned to Curtis for the final step. He had arranged for a local medium, Madame Serena, to assist with the ritual. Madame Serena was known for her ability to communicate with the dead, and she agreed to help them free the spirits trapped within the bakery. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Elm Street, they gathered in the bakery. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Madame Serena set up a small altar in the kitchen, placing the items in a precise arrangement. "We will call upon the spirits," Madame Serena explained, her voice steady. "We will acknowledge their pain and guide them to the light." Emily, Mr. Carter, Curtis, and Madame Serena joined hands around the altar. As Madame Serena began to chant, the room grew cold and the whispers intensified, filling the air with their mournful pleas. "Spirits of the past," Madame Serena intoned, "we call upon you. We acknowledge your suffering. We seek to release you from this torment." The temperature plummeted further, and the figures of the spirits began to materialize around them. Samuel Grayson's twisted form appeared, his hollow eyes filled with anger and sorrow. The spirits of his victims surrounded him, their faces etched with fear and pain. Madame Serena continued to chant, her voice rising above the whispers. "We offer these tokens, symbols of your suffering, to break the chains that bind you, find peace and rest." As the final words left her lips, a brilliant light filled the room. The spirits began to dissolve, their forms becoming ethereal and transparent. The air grew warm, and the oppressive weight lifted. Samuel's ghost looked at Emily, his expression softening. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, before fading into the light. The spirits of his victims followed, their faces finally at peace. The light dimmed, leaving the bakery bathed in a serene glow. The whispers had ceased, and the air felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. Emily and the others let out a collective sigh of relief, their hearts filled with hope. The bakery, once a place of nightmares, had been cleansed. The spirits had found peace, and the dark legacy of Samuel Grayson had been laid to rest. Emily and Mr. Carter knew there would always be a memory of the past, but they could now move forward, their hearts unburdened by the shadows that had haunted them. Despite the successful ritual, an unease lingered in the air. The bakery seemed quieter, almost too quiet, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Determined to keep the bakery running smoothly, she decided to stay late one night to prepare for a large order, hoping the solitude and the rhythmic work would bring her some peace. The clock struck midnight, and Emily was alone in the bakery. The hum of the refrigerators and the faint ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds accompanying her. She rolled out dough, her hands moving methodically, when the temperature in the room suddenly dropped. She shivered, pulling her sweater tighter around her. As she continued to work, the whispers began again, faint but unmistakable. Emily froze, her heart racing. She had hoped the ritual had ended the hauntings, but the voices seemed determined to prove otherwise. "Why are you still here?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. The whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of desperate pleas and angry cries. The kitchen seemed to darken, the shadows deepening and stretching across the room. Emily turned, and there he was, the ghostly figure of Samuel Grayson, his eyes hollow and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. "No," Emily gasped, backing away. "We ended this. You're supposed to be gone." Samuel's apparition stepped forward, his form flickering like a dying flame. He raised a blood-stained hand, pointing directly at Emily. "You haven't uncovered everything," he rasped, his voice a chilling echo. The room began to spin, the walls closing in around her. Emily stumbled, her vision blurring. She could hear the cries of the spirits, the victims trapped in a cycle of torment. Desperate, she turned and ran toward the office, where she knew Mr. Carter kept the diary they had found. Slamming the door behind her, Emily grabbed the diary from the desk and flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. The final entry caught her eye, a passage she had somehow overlooked before. Samuel had written about a final, desperate act, a dark ritual intended to bind his spirit to the bakery, ensuring he would never be forgotten. Emily's blood ran cold. The ritual they had performed had only released the victim's spirits, but Samuel's own twisted soul was still trapped, his dark magic keeping him tethered to the bakery. She needed to find a way to break this final curse. As she pored over the diary, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Emily jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to face Samuel's spirit once and for all, to confront the horror that had plagued the bakery for so long. Clutching the diary, she made her way back to the kitchen. The air was thick with tension, the shadows writhing as if alive. Samuel's ghost stood in the center of the room, his eyes locked on Emily. "You won't win," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I will end this." Samuel's laughter echoed through the room, a chilling sound that made her skin crawl. "You think you can defeat me? You're just a baker, nothing more." Emily took a deep breath, focusing on the diary's instructions. She needed to disrupt the symbols of Samuel's ritual, to break the spell that bound him. She moved swiftly, erasing the bloodstains on the floor and walls, scattering salt in a protective circle around herself. Samuel's form wavered, his anger palpable. "Stop this!" he roared, lunging at her. Emily ignored him, chanting the words she had found in the diary. The air crackled with energy, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet. As she completed the final incantation, a blinding light filled the room. Samuel's scream of rage and pain echoed in Emily's ears as his form disintegrated, dissolving into the light. The kitchen was filled with a deafening silence, and the oppressive weight lifted. Emily collapsed to her knees, exhausted but relieved. As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, Emily knew she had finally broken the curse. The bakery was free of Samuel's dark influence, and the spirits of his victims could now rest in peace. The whispers were gone, replaced by a serene stillness. Mr. Carter arrived shortly after, finding Emily sitting on the floor, the diary clutched in her hands. He helped her to her feet, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right, Emily?" She nodded, offering a weary smile. "I think it's finally over. Samuel is gone." Together, they cleaned up the kitchen, erasing the last traces of the haunting. As they worked, a sense of calm settled over the bakery. The dark chapter had finally come to a close, and the bakery could once again be a place of warmth and joy. Emily knew the memory of the horrors would never fully fade, but she also knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. The bakery was her home, and she would protect it with everything she had. Days turned into weeks, and the bakery's eerie incidents seemed to cease. Yet the memories of those haunting nights lingered in the back of everyone's minds. Emily, Mr. Carter, and Curtis continued to dig into the bakery's past, convinced that they needed to understand every facet of Samuel Grayson's dark history to ensure the curse was truly broken. One evening, Curtis called Emily and Mr. Carter to his study. He had uncovered new information that he believed could shed light on the lingering shadows of the bakery. "I found something," Curtis said, gesturing to a stack of old newspaper clippings and court records spread out on his desk. "There was a detail in Samuel Grayson's trial that we overlooked." Emily leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Curtis handed her a yellowed newspaper article. There was another person involved, Samuel's apprentice, a young man named Daniel Hale. He disappeared the night Samuel was killed, and his body was never found. Mr. Carter frowned, scanning the article. "So, there might be another spirit tied to the bakery." Curtis nodded. "It's possible. The townsfolk believed Daniel was innocent, but he was deeply involved in Samuel's work. Some even say he was coerced into participating in the dark rituals." Emily shivered, the room growing colder. "Do you think Daniel's spirit is still trapped there?" Curtis sighed. "It's likely. If he died in the bakery, his spirit could be bound by the same dark magic that Samuel used." Determined to uncover the truth, Emily and Mr. Carter decided to hold another seance, this time focused on contacting Daniel's spirit. They gathered in the bakery one evening, joined by Madame Serena once more. The kitchen was dimly lit, the only light coming from a few flickering candles placed around the room. Madame Serena set up her altar, arranging the items they had found previously, along with a few personal artifacts they had managed to track down belonging to Daniel Hale. As they joined hands around the altar, Madame Serena began to chant, her voice low and melodic. "Spirits of the past, we call upon you. Daniel Hale, if you are here, reveal yourself." The room grew colder, and the candles flickered wildly. A faint, shimmering light appeared in the center of the kitchen, gradually taking shape. The figure of a young man emerged, his face etched with sorrow and fear. "Daniel," Emily called out softly. The ghostly figure nodded, his eyes filled with anguish. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry for everything. Samuel, he forced me to help him. I didn't want to do those things." Emily's heart ached for the young man, trapped in a nightmare not of his own making. We want to help you find peace, Daniel. Tell us what happened that night. Daniel's form flickered, and his expression grew pained. The night the mob came, Samuel knew they were coming for him. He used a final ritual, sacrificing me to bind his spirit here. He thought he could escape judgment that way. Curtis's eyes widened. That's why the curse lingered. Samuel's final act bound both your spirits here. Madame Serena's voice was calm and steady. Daniel, we need to know how to break this final curse. What can we do? Daniel's ghost seemed to hesitate, then he spoke slowly. You need to destroy the symbols of Samuel's power, the talismans he used to bind us. They're hidden in the walls, behind the oven. Only then can we be free. Emily nodded, her resolve firm. We'll do it, Daniel. We'll free you. As Daniel's spirit faded, Emily and Mr. Carter immediately set to work. They carefully dismantled the area behind the old oven, uncovering a hidden compartment filled with dark, twisted artifacts. The air around them grew thick with a malevolent energy, but they pressed on, determined to destroy the talismans. With each artifact they shattered, the oppressive weight in the room lifted slightly. The final piece, a small, intricately carved idol, crumbled to dust in Emily's hands. A rush of warm air filled the kitchen, and the remaining shadows dissipated. Madame Serena smiled, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. It's done. The curse is broken. Emily and Mr. Carter let out a collective sigh of relief. They had uncovered the full truth and freed the spirits trapped by Samuel's dark magic. The bakery was finally free of its haunting past. The next morning, the bakery opened its doors to a bright sunny day. The air was filled with the comforting aroma of fresh pastries, and the townspeople entered with smiles on their faces, no longer haunted by shadows of the past. Emily knew that while the memory of the horrors would always be a part of the bakery's history, it was now a place of light and hope, a testament to the strength and resilience of those who had fought to free it from its dark legacy. Despite the bakery's newfound sense of peace, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their work wasn't entirely finished. She often caught herself glancing at the spot where Samuel Grayson's ghost had stood, haunted by the thought of the horrors he had inflicted. Determined to lay all doubts to rest, she decided to delve even deeper into the past and find any remaining ties to the cursed bakery. One evening, Emily, Mr. Carter, and Curtis gathered in the bakery to sift through the final remnants of Samuel's diary and other historical documents. They sought out every last detail, hoping to uncover any lingering traces of the dark magic that had once gripped the bakery. As they pored over the documents, Emily found a hidden compartment in the back of the diary. Inside was a small folded piece of parchment covered in Samuel's frantic handwriting. It detailed the specifics of the final ritual, including one crucial element they hadn't considered: the need for an apology to the spirits from Samuel himself. "This is it," Emily said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Samuel needs to apologize for what he did. It's the final piece we were missing." Mr. Carter frowned. "But Samuel's spirit is gone. How can we get an apology from him now?" Curtis leaned back, deep in thought. "We need to perform one last seance. This time, we'll call on Samuel directly and demand his apology. It's the only way to ensure the spirits are fully at peace." They agreed to conduct the seance that very night. As darkness fell, they gathered in the bakery's kitchen once more. The air was thick with anticipation, and a lingering sense of dread. Madame Serena joined them again, ready to guide them through this final, crucial step. With the familiar setup of candles and symbols, they joined hands around the altar. Madame Serena's voice was firm and commanding as she called upon the spirit of Samuel Grayson. "Samuel Grayson, we summon you. Come forth and face the consequences of your actions. It is time to atone for your sins." The temperature dropped sharply, and a chilling wind swept through the room. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Slowly, Samuel's ghostly form materialized before them, his expression twisted with anger and fear. "You dare summon me?" Samuel's voice was a venomous hiss. "I will not be judged by you." Emily stepped forward, her voice steady and resolute. "Samuel, you must apologize. Your victims deserve peace, and it's the only way to free them and yourself from this torment." Samuel's eyes narrowed, his ghostly figure trembling with rage. "They were necessary. My work required sacrifices." Madame Serena's voice cut through the tension. "You have no power here, Samuel. You are bound by the same laws as any spirit. Apologize and free yourself from this eternal suffering." For a moment, it seemed as if Samuel would refuse. Then, something in his expression shifted. The rage gave way to a deep, sorrowful weariness. He bowed his head, his form flickering. I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused, for the lives I took. It was never worth it." As the words left his lips, the room grew warmer. The oppressive weight that had lingered for so long began to lift. The spirits of Samuel's victims appeared around him, their faces serene and peaceful. One by one, they nodded in acceptance and began to fade into the light. Samuel's form shimmered, his expression one of profound relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. Then he too faded away, leaving the bakery in a warm, peaceful silence. The candles burned brightly, their light steady and unwavering. Emily, Mr. Carter, and Curtis stood in silence, absorbing the significance of what had just transpired. They had finally confronted the past, forcing Samuel to acknowledge his sins and freeing the spirits once and for all. As they cleaned up the remnants of the seance, Emily felt a sense of closure. The bakery was no longer haunted by its dark history. Instead, it stood as a testament to the power of redemption and the strength of those who fought to uncover the truth. The next day, the bakery buzzed with life. Customers chatted and laughed, the air filled with the comforting aroma of fresh pastries. Emily watched them with a smile, her heart light. The bakery had finally become what it was always meant to be, a place of warmth, community, and peace. The relief that had settled over the bakery following Samuel Grayson's apology was palpable. Yet Emily, Mr. Carter, and Curtis knew that one final step remained to ensure the curse was completely broken. They needed to perform a ritual of cleansing, a final act to purify the bakery and remove any lingering traces of dark magic. Emily contacted Father Michael, the local priest known for his knowledge of exorcisms and spiritual cleansings. He agreed to assist them, understanding the gravity of the situation and the importance of restoring peace to the bakery. On a crisp autumn evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded, Father Michael arrived at the bakery. His presence brought a sense of calm and authority. He carried with him a small case containing the necessary tools for the ritual: holy water, blessed candles, and a worn leather-bound book of prayers. Emily, Mr. Carter, Curtis, and Madame Serena gathered in the kitchen, the heart of the bakery where so much suffering had occurred. Father Michael set up a small altar and placed the candles around the room, their flames casting a warm, soothing glow. "We are here to cleanse this place of its dark past," Father Michael began, his voice resonating with conviction. "To free it from the chains of sorrow and pain, and to ensure that peace and light prevail." The group formed a circle around the altar, holding hands as Father Michael began to pray. His words were powerful, each one infused with a sense of hope and renewal. As he spoke, he sprinkled holy water around the room, the droplets shimmering in the candlelight. Emily felt a wave of warmth wash over her, as if the very air was being purified. She closed her eyes, allowing the power of the prayers to fill her. She thought of the spirits who had suffered here, of Samuel Grayson's victims, and of the final apology that had freed them. As Father Michael continued his prayers, the candles burned brighter, their flames steady and unwavering. The oppressive weight that had lingered in the bakery lifted completely, replaced by a lightness that filled every corner of the room. Madame Serena added her voice to the prayers, calling upon the spirits to find peace and move on from this world. Her melodic chanting blended with Father Michael's deep, resonant voice, creating a harmony that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Suddenly, a soft, ethereal light filled the kitchen. The group gasped as the spirits of Samuel's victims appeared one last time, their forms glowing with a gentle radiance. They smiled, their expressions filled with gratitude and peace. One by one, they nodded to Emily and the others, then slowly faded into the light, their presence leaving a feeling of profound serenity. The ritual reached its climax as Father Michael recited the final prayer, his voice strong and unwavering. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I cleanse this place of all darkness. Let it be filled with light, love, and peace." As he finished, the candles flickered one last time, their flames leaping high before settling into a calm, steady glow. The room was filled with a sense of completion, of a journey finally ending. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked around at the faces of her friends and allies, seeing the same sense of relief and joy mirrored in their expressions. The bakery was free. Truly free. Father Michael smiled, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "The curse is broken. This place is now a sanctuary of peace." The group shared a moment of silent celebration, the weight of their long struggle lifting completely. They had faced the darkness, uncovered the truth, and brought light to a place that had been shrouded in shadow for far too long. The next morning, the bakery opened its doors to a new beginning. Customers streamed in, drawn by the delicious aromas and the welcoming atmosphere. The shadows of the past had been banished, replaced by the warmth of community and the promise of a bright future. Emily stood behind the counter, her heart light. She knew that the bakery would always hold memories of its dark history, but it was now a place of redemption and renewal. The spirits had found peace, and so had she. As the bell above the door jingled and the bakery filled with laughter and chatter, Emily smiled. The cursed bakery had become a place of joy, a testament to the power of truth, love, and the unyielding spirit of those who fought to break the chains of the past.